Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Spirit of Liberty. Appreciate you joining me live again. Hope to be a big help and a blessing to you today as we talk about fornicators. And that is a subject, I think, some things, very important things we need to understand about this subject. Now, if you've been paying attention, you noticed in the thumbnail and right at the beginning, I had a picture of Darrell Brooks on there. I don't know if anyone has been following that case, but Darrell Brooks, he was the individual that rammed his car through a parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I believe it was 6 people that he killed, and he injured several other people. And one thing I always enjoy doing whenever there's big court cases going on, I like to watch some of that stuff. I'm interested in court things, not fake court stuff like Judge Judy and stuff like that, but real court. I just find it interesting, and a lot of times when I'm driving around, if there's a big case going on, I'll watch those things live. I've watched a lot of the Rittenhouse trial. I've watched several of the big ones. I watched a lot of the Alex Jones trial, which is just embarrassing for our nation that there's court cases like that going on. But this one too, frankly, it was pretty embarrassing. I personally, I have a lot of opinions, and just let me, give a disclaimer right now. I'm going to give some of my opinions about this case, and understand my opinions do not reflect the laws of our land. So obviously, when I talk about what I think should have happened during this case, I'm not saying the judge should have done these things. She could not have done them the way our laws work in this land. So this isn't necessarily a criticism of the judge, even though it does seem like she was kind of in over her head and let this guy get away with a lot of junk. But in case, what I want to do before I get into the subject of fornicators, because people probably think, why using Darrell Brooks as an illustration of that? And by the end of this program, you will understand full well why, when I think of a fornicator, I would think of someone like Darrell Brooks. But if you followed this case at all, one of the things that we see is this guy was just absolutely out of control in the courtroom. It is embarrassing what this guy was doing, what he was able to get away with. Except in my opinion, when he was doing this stuff in the courtroom, I think when you refuse to respect the proceedings and to respect the process, then you know what? I think the rules go out the window for you. And I personally, and this is my opinion, I think the judge should have given him some warnings. And as he continued to disobey, I think she should have had a bailiff start, cracking him with his baton, tasing him, doing whatever they had to do to get that guy under control. Because it's ridiculous. This guy, he represented himself, which, I get it. Legally, you're allowed to do that. But if you aren't going to follow the rules, then I don't think you should be allowed to do that. And I do. I think Darrell Brooks embarrassed our nation and our court system by a lot of the things that went on. But let me go ahead and before we, I'm going to show you some videos of stuff that went on. Let's go ahead and read some things about Darrell Brooks in case you're not familiar with this case. But it says, I'll start reading this. This is from Wikipedia. I'm just going to give you his criminal history. There's a lot we could say about this guy. He was definitely pretty crazy, but we'll look at his criminal history because this is what bothers me. So many stories of mass shootings, mass murders. When you actually look into the history, if we had a decent legal system, these crimes never would have happened. If we just attempted to follow the Bible, we would not have stories like this. These things should not happen. Jeffrey Dahmer never should have happened. John Wayne Gacy never should have happened. Darrell Brooks and the Waukesha incident never should have happened. What happened there was a failure in our legal system. And let's look at his criminal history, because it says Brooks has been arrested 3 weeks prior to the Waukesha attack for hitting his ex-girlfriend and ramming the woman with the same vehicle during a domestic dispute at a gas station in Milwaukee. The charges against him for that case include second-degree recklessly endangering safety with domestic abuse assessments, a felony as well as disorderly conduct with domestic abuse assessments, misdemeanor battery with domestic abuse assessments, and obstructing an officer. Brooks posted $1,000 bail on November 19th, 2 days before the Waukesha attack, and was released. Brooks was also arrested 5 months and 5 weeks prior to the dispute for domestic violence while staying at the Country Hearth Inn in Union City, Georgia, when a witness told police that he confronted Brooks after hearing Brooks arguing and beating up his ex-girlfriend on the other side of the wall repeatedly in a hotel room, which, according to WXIA-TV, said that Brooks flashed a firearm in front of her during the argument. Brooks appeared in court the following day on May 28th and ended up receiving a signature bond, but never made it to his signature court date. At the time of the attack, Brooks also had an outstanding warrant for statutory sex crimes in Sparks, Nevada, which was issued in 2016. Nearly 10 years prior, in November 2006, he was convicted of a felony statutory sexual seduction after impregnating a 15-year-old girl in Sparks. He was sentenced to 12 to 36 months at the Washoe County Jail in Reno until being released in September 2008. Brooks also had previous criminality charges in 2 other Wisconsin cities, Manitowoc in 2005 and Wisconsin Rapids in 2010. So right there, folks, when you look at his criminal history, after what he had done to the 15-year-old girl, that guy should have been underground or even in prison for life, if it were not for the death penalty. These things never should have happened. This guy is somebody who clearly has absolutely no restraints in his life, no control of himself. He has no respect for anything. There is nothing that this guy will submit to. And even after he gets arrested, after he does all these things, he is just completely out of control in court, no respect for anything. And just understand, remember, this guy who is being sentenced today, I was watching some of the proceedings today, while he's sitting there flipping through a book, while victims, people that he hurt, family members are testifying to the judge. He's still being disrespectful. The guy's a clown. And I believe it was a Bible he was using too. He's been talking like he's a Christian and just an absolute mockery this guy is doing, pretending to be a Christian, and then just with these court proceedings. And I'm disgusted that they let him get away with it. But I want you to just watch some videos of this guy's behavior, because this is a perfect example of just a good-for-nothing individual, no restraint of any kind. And the first clip I'm going to show you, I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it's pretty long, but they were questioning a man who is testifying, and he doesn't speak English, so they had to use an interpreter, and he's objecting to every single question. He's just being obnoxious. He's just objecting to everything. The judge is warning him, and just listen to this guy be a little punk in the courtroom.
Did you have to have surgery on that leg?
Objection. Bleeding.
Overruled.
Sí.
Yes. See what y'all
Just one?
Dos.
Two. That's not gonna work either.
Mr. Brooks, you are advised to stop with the commentary.
No, I'm gonna say what I want.
You called this witness. I'm going to take a break right now and excuse the jury and this witness.
That's not fair to the jury. They have a right to hear everything. Not finna sit here and let you fix the trial because you don't want to tell the truth to the jury.
Mr. Brooks, please stop.
No, ain't no please.
You are
nothing.
being disruptive.
Ain't
You
no
are being
please.
disrespectful.
You always
The
gonna
witness
find
may
some
step
reason to
down.
say somebody's being disruptive because they want the truth to be out there. Man, quit it. You supposed to be the
Mr.
judge.
Brooks, I'm advising you that continued interruptions will result in you forfeiting your right to be present
and
in this
under
courtroom.
what law and
during
fact can you do that?
Illinois versus Allen.
Okay,
sir.
but the fourth option that you made up, that's not even in the law,
Mr.
because
Brooks,
you can't do that.
I need to make a
By law, you
ruling.
can't do that,
I need to
and
make
you
a
know you
finding.
can't.
All right, I'm going to excuse everyone. Mr. Brooks is being removed from the courtroom. He will continue in the neighboring courtroom. Please make sure he has his objection signed and a pad of paper.
All right, so right there, you see just that shameful display. Just a little punk, a little mouthy. He's still like a teenager. that just won't shut up when he's being corrected, just, interrupting, out of control, making a joke of everything. I'm disgusted this kind of stuff was even allowed to go on. And so then we're going to show you another part where, and I said there was a lot of stuff. I'm just kind of hitting some highlights, but he was wearing an orange jumpsuit, and the judge was giving him a chance to go back to the jail and change in normal clothes, and he's just being obnoxious and ignorant. And so because he's not behaving, they had to put him in a different courtroom so they could, have him mic'd, and they can mute him if they need to, because he was being so disruptive, because he's not following any rules. He's throwing a tantrum like a little kid, and the guy ends up taking his shirt off, right, in the courtroom, just being obnoxious and disrespectful. So check this out.
The record appearances are as they were before. I need to make a record that at 8:42 a.m. this court ordered Mr. Brooks be removed from the courtroom due to repeated interruptions and disruption with the court. This, of course, comes on the recent history with Mr. Brooks. On every day that we have been in court since Monday, he has shown a complete and utter disrespect for the simple rules of civility. He has been removed from the courtroom multiple times. This morning alone, he started interrupting this court within a minute of the court calling the case. I should also make a record at the moment he is muted because of the way that he was removed from the courtroom and his conduct since. I have been given just a bit of information about it. I will advise everyone that I have required that the Sheriff's Department file a written report with the court regarding Mr. Brooks's conduct. I'm told that he would not sit down while in this courtroom in order to have the shackles removed so that he could be taken to the other courtroom, that he was resisting, that at one point he took off a shoe, and it appeared to the deputies that he was going to throw the shoe.
All right, so there you have it. Just, again, being disrespectful, completely out of control, he's not gonna follow the rules or anything. Again, why they had to follow all these processes with this guy, again, I think they just should have had a bailiff there and just, again, give him a warning, and then if he doesn't go along, they just beat the snot out of him right there. Make the guy submit and stop. And the thing is, when I was listening to some of the families testify today too, they were talking about how evil it was for him. They're like kind of praising the judge, which if they think she did great, that's fine. But then at the same time too, condemning him for representing himself, because then he's getting to question these victims, while showing no remorse, while not being respectful, while not following rules. Those people shouldn't have had to put up with that kind of thing. They absolutely should not have put up with that. And we've got to have better rules to just stop, junk like this from happening. He said our legal system in this country is a mess for sure. It is not biblical, the stuff that's going on. And so we have just joke trials like this one. And I frankly think it's embarrassing. And I want to show you this one last clip, which is where the thumbnail's from. I was actually watching this live when it happened, and he was complaining, and they were actually talking about his criminal history and what had happened with a 15-year-old girl, and he got mad about something, is objecting. The judge is just not going along with him, so he just gets angry, and you'll hear him in the clip. You'll kind of hear a bang. He like pounds the table, and then goes in a stare down with the judge and freaks her out. And this isn't funny. Because, again, this is embarrassing that this was allowed to go on in a courtroom in America. But watch what happens.
You want to run the record back?
Mr. Brooks,
So I'm the only one. I got one
Brooks.
ear that work, and I heard that.
this
Come on,
is
man.
to benefit
man.
you so
No,
that
it's
you
not.
understand
Ain't none of
your
this to benefit
witness
me, so let's
has
be clear
a
about
prior
that.
record.
Your Honor, when I leave the table, I'm away from the courtroom, and I have to elevate my voice. This is the
So she had to
alleged
elevate her
record of
voice
Abel
just for
Lescott.
that.
Stop talking.
Come on, man. Like, I don't know who y'all be thinking y'all fooling. I accept the value in return for value. this document.
One more interruption and you're going to be removed to the next courtroom.
That's what you want to do anyway.
It's not what I want to do. Do not interrupt Attorney Opper.
So can
Your
you
Honor,
tell,
I
can you
believe he
explain-
has 7 prior criminal convictions via OWI 2nd from 1997, and OWI 3rd from 1997, and OWI 4th from 2003, criminal trespass to dwelling from 2006.
Right, I need to take a break. This man right now is having a stare down with me. It's very disrespectful. He pounded his fist. Frankly, it makes me scared. And we're taking a break.
So you look at that defiant little brat. Little kids do that kind of thing. When they get mad at mom and dad, they will be defiant. They'll pound their fists, stomp their feet or whatever, and then just get all defiant. And again, this guy is just about as big a pile of garbage as you could find on this earth. And so, again, people are wondering why I used him in the thumbnail and while I would use him to illustrate a fornicator. And I'm doing that for a very good reason, because fornication, while it is a very specific sin, there is a little more to it. There's a reason that people do that kind of sin. There's something behind people like that. And I think Darrell Brooks is a very good example of that. I think he's an example of a worse case when it comes to that kind of thing. But interestingly enough, if you look up the word fornicator in dictionary.com, it's not there. Fornicate's in there, but fornicator is not in there. But in the Webster's 1828 dictionary, you will see that the definition is an unmarried person, male or female, who has criminal conversation with the other sex. Also a married man who has sexual commerce with an unmarried woman. Another definition is a lewd person. And then the third definition it gives is an idolater. And it's interesting about that, because one of the things that we see in the Bible when it talks about fornicators, a lot of times, again, it doesn't just tell us about the specific sin, but a lot of times it's explaining the character of a person. When the Bible talks about a fornicator, it's using that term not to just show guilt of a certain sexual sin, but it's a reference to the character of that person. And that is very telling. And again, represents guys like Darrell Brooks. And so, because a fornicator is someone who just has no boundaries. They do whatever their flesh wants to do. Listen, we all want to get defiant sometimes. We all want to, pound our fist, stomp our foot, maybe hit somebody or whatever. We all have that feeling come over us, but most of us have boundaries and we will not allow ourselves to do those things. This guy was beating up women all the time, ran his car into a woman just days before he does it through a crowd of people. And for some reason, this guy's walking the streets. And so a fornicator, somebody, every normal man has a desire for, a physical relationship with a woman, but a decent man, they have boundaries. A decent man, they will only allow themselves to do that with one woman, and it will be one that they are married to. So once you step outside of the bounds that God has given when it comes to that kind of thing, you are a fornicator at that point. And so not only have you committed a really bad sin, but you have revealed your character in doing this sin, and it is not a very good thing. The Bible has a lot to say about it. And here's the thing too, people who are fornicators almost always struggle in many of the other same areas. It's just kind of who they are, because again, different works that people do, it reveals their heart. It reveals who they are on the inside. And so people who will commit unlawful sexual acts, they will do just about anything. Okay? Now, again, the Bible is very strong and when it comes to these things, and I believe we should be. I will say that, one thing that we are up against today is our culture has become one of just no boundaries, where people are not taught to control their flesh in any way at all. And so, I don't think that every fornicator out there is like some kind of reprobate or anything like that. Some people, if you don't teach your kids to just get their flesh under control, then you know what? It's going to eventually cause some great problems in a lot of other areas. And I think we're seeing this kind of thing more and more today, because there are just no boundaries in people's lives, nothing governing them. And I'm telling you right now, people who refuse those things are revealing themselves to be some very terrible people. And so let me give you some more scripture on this subject. Okay, this would be, this would actually have been just a good sermon for church, but I've wanted to say, use it for this program because I think men especially need this kind of thing, and I wanted to be able to use the video illustrations. And so as we talk about some of these things, you're going to understand why. Again, Darrell Brooks is a great example of a fornicator. He has no boundaries. He will not let anything control what he does. Just doesn't matter, where the rest of us just kind of have these natural things. But in 1 Corinthians 5:9, Paul speaking says, I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators. Hey, now, what's so bad about fornicators? Why that specific sin is Paul bringing that up? Aren't we all sinners? I mean, good night. You go talking about people's sins, but you've got sin too. People always do that. Anytime you get specific about a sin of theirs, they start talking about all your other sins that you have too. But you know what? Different sins do come with different penalties, and different sins reveal different aspects of a person's character, and they reveal that they are dangerous people. Not everyone that's a sinner is a dangerous person, but there are some sinners out there who are very dangerous, and they reveal themselves by certain sins, and fornication is one of those. And so he tells them, don't company with them. Okay, and this isn't saying that a person cannot be forgiven, that a person cannot be restored from that kind of thing. It's not saying that, but anybody who is currently engaged in that kind of activity, anyone who is unrepentant about that kind of activity, has no place in a church. Okay? I'm not telling you if you have somebody visit your church shacking up, you can't allow them to visit or anything like that. But if somebody's going to be a part of a congregation, they can't be living in that kind of sin. Absolutely not. And, and I've had to have some conversations with people before about that. And, it typically results in them not coming back to church. And because the last thing they want, somebody telling them what to do, somebody telling them to govern their lives. They have no boundaries. They have no restrictions. And so Paul tells them, don't company with them. And he says, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world. And then he goes and he names some other sins too. And a lot of times in the Bible, when you see fornication mentioned, there's other things that we often see that are associated with it. Because again, while fornication is a specific sin, it also reveals a character flaw. And people who have the character flaw of fornication typically have these other flaws too. They just kind of go hand in hand. So he says, not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then ye must needs go out of the world. But now I have written unto you not to keep company, if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner. With such an one, know not to eat. For what have I to do to judge them also that are without? Do not ye judge them that are within, but them that are without God judgeth. Therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person. And that word wicked too specifically means lawless. Somebody who just, again, they have no law, they have nothing governing them, they don't have any boundaries, and it calls people like that lawless. And so people who have no boundaries, people who, just will not let anything govern them. We see here when he's talking about fornicators, he includes people that are covetous, people that are willing to pursue things that are not theirs to have, that just do not belong to them and cannot belong to them. Extortioners, people that are willing to get things from people by unlawful means or immoral means. Idolaters, and I find it interesting how we see idolatry associated with this type of thing quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to pretend I fully understand this. I think this would probably be an interesting study. But what is it about idolatry and sexual sin that seem to go together? Okay. Now, because, to me, and I think a lot of it is the day that we live in, we have the knowledge that an idol is nothing, that it's just a statue. And so, in our time that we're living in now, we just, in our culture, we don't seem to struggle with that as much. But the thing is, back in the day, those idolatrous cultures usually were very sensual, lewd cultures too. With the idolatry, there was typically a lot of immoral behavior involved, a lot of nakedness involved. When the children of Israel made the golden calf, what was one of the things that was involved with that? They made themselves naked. So again, I think idolatry, it's very possible it's more than just the fact that you're bowing to a statue, but it's the practices that were associated with it. And that was the nakedness, the sexual problems. So that, it appears though, idolatrous people don't just typically have a problem of bowing before an idol. All this other stuff comes with it too, because those practices were associated with it. And because, it's just of the devil. The Bible talks about how they're sacrificing things to devils. And so the devil, he's going to try to defile you in getting you to do these type of physical things. And he's going to try to remove those boundaries from your life. And it's interesting too, how Webster's 1828, one of the definitions that they said is idolatry. And I think too, again, because that's spiritual fornication, you could say, or spiritual adultery. But I don't want to get too sidetracked on that. But it is interesting how it's real easy for us to associate all these other sins in our culture with fornication. Idolatry seems a little more difficult in the day that we're living in. But he mentions too, a railer, people who have just no control over what they say. I'm amazed at people's ability to just go and publicly and unapologetically spread rumors, lie, slander, misrepresent, and that there's absolutely no consequences for it too. It's amazing, even in some churches, the amount of railing that takes place, even from the pulpit, and no consequences within the church, which is where it should be. And some places are so bad, the government's even stepping in. And I don't think people ought to try using that and bringing our goofed up, messed up court system into something like that. But again, when a church refuses to govern itself, and when it refuses to, when it has absolutely no boundaries, don't be surprised when outside forces step in and take over. It's the same thing in family. I believe, government ought to stay out of family. But, if a father has no boundaries and he's beating his wife and abusing his kids and things like that, somebody's going to step in and they're going to take over in that house. And so, the thing is, just don't be, an animal, and, you'll probably be fine. And just have some control, govern yourselves. A drunkard, somebody who they just don't know when to stop. Whatever they feel like drinking, they're gonna drink it. Whatever they feel like eating at that moment, they're gonna eat it with absolutely no regulation on these things. And so he's telling them, don't eat with these people, don't fellowship with these people, don't associate. And so they are wicked, they are lawless people. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14, it says, "Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For ye know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears." Now, why is it talking about a fornicator and profane person and comparing him to Esau? Do we have any record in the Bible of Esau committing fornication? Not that I know of, but you know what we do see Esau doing is something so foolish as to sell his own birthright for a morsel of meat. And you know what? That's comparable to a fornicator who they will destroy their future, they will destroy their soul for a moment of pleasure with a woman. And so, you know, again, fornication, it's comparable to a lot of different things because you are throwing away so much for so little. And so I think Esau is a good example of that, even though fornication itself, the sexual act, you know, there's no record of him doing that in the Bible. So I think that's an interesting thing right there. And it refers to him as a profane person. Okay, you don't want people like that in your church. And, you know, you can get to the point where, you know, you can't undo. You know, there's some sins that you just can't undo. God can forgive you, but you're still going to have earthly consequences. It's not going to, you know, the reproach isn't going to be wiped away, and you're going to deal with, you're going to have earthly problems for the rest of your life. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he says, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication." Again, because every red-blooded man desires, you know, a physical relationship with a woman. They're going to have that desire to touch, but you know what? We have to have boundaries. We have to have something governing us, limiting us in this area. And so Paul telling people, you know, to help you avoid fornication, if you really want it that bad, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. You can go and enjoy yourself there, but it needs to be limited to your spouse. Okay? And I shouldn't have to specify that they have to be opposite genders, but welcome to America 2022. But it says, "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency." Notice how the woman has power over the man, and the man has power over the woman. Something governing them, something limiting them. Okay? A fornicator, they're not going to let a wife tell them what to do. An adulterer is not going to do that. If they want to do something else, you know, if they want to go enjoy themselves with somebody else, you can't tell them no. You know, you've got most of these guys today, they won't even put a ring on the girl's finger. They won't even marry her first before they're having their way with her. And you know what? What a shame it is that women are letting men do that. I was just today, I was at one of my least favorite places in the entire world, you know, the DMV, and there was a lady in there talking about how she was about to get married after being engaged for 10 years. 10 years they've been engaged. And, you know, and I'm sitting there thinking, what in the world? And of course they were shacking up, you know, so what was the guy's hurry? And sure enough, man, that guy comes walking in, and you know what? He is, you can just tell by looking at him, fornicator. You can just tell by looking at him. Just absolutely no self-control. I mean, just, you know, looked like a slob. I mean, not an ounce of character. It was just so obvious. And, you know, what an absolute shame that is. Let me tell you something. I think one of the good things about an engagement, period. Yeah, I mean, if there's nothing that says when you meet somebody you can't get married really fast. Okay, there's nothing that says that. Obviously, you need to take time. But here's a good thing about that dating period, that engagement period, whatever, is see if the guy can control himself. See if the guy has the character to limit himself and to hold off until marriage. A lot of people have this attitude, well, it's okay because we're engaged. Baloney. It's not okay. And right there, the fact that he can't wait till he's engaged, that tells you what you need to know about him. He's a fornicator. He has no boundaries. And the thing is, because he has no boundaries, what makes you think that just because you get married, all of a sudden, now the guy's going to have character? All of a sudden, now the guy's going to have boundaries. It's not the case. And, you know, and one thing that people used to do too, whenever a woman would Whenever they would end up sleeping together, that was like, oh, now they have to get married. Well, here's the problem with that. Okay. Now, because here's me as a father. Okay. Obviously, I'd be devastated if my daughter went and fornicated with some dude. But you know what? I'm not. You want to know why people wanted them to hurry up and get married? To just kind of cover up what had happened, especially in case they got pregnant or something like that. Because there was so much shame, as there should have been, that associated with fornication. But the thing is, the last thing I want is my daughter being stuck for life with a guy who's already proved he has no boundaries. And it's like, oh, well, what if they have a kid coming? Listen, is it going to make it better if she has more kids with a guy that has no boundaries? I'm just here to tell you that you need to watch out for that kind of stuff. And a guy who can control himself during a dating period, during a engagement period, and can wait until after the marriage, I'm telling you right there, that tells you a lot about the individual. And I'm telling you, girls, you should dump any guy that pressures you to sleep with him before you're married. You need to have more respect for yourself. And, a lot of women today, they can't figure out why they can't get any respect from a guy. Well, you got to demand that respect. Obviously, a lot of women don't even respect themselves. And that's why they allow this kind of thing, And so, if you're not even going to respect yourself, what makes you think the guy's going to? And obviously he should, but it's just probably not going to happen. You need to have some self-respect and not let guys like this, have their way with you. It's absolutely awful. You keep it within the bonds of marriage. And so, again, this is how people, used to live, and unfortunately, we are taking more and more restraints away in every area. We have less and less punishment for almost everything. We're barely putting anybody to death anymore. Barely anything even gets a death penalty. This Darrell Brooks probably won't even get the death penalty. But here we have a guy who is like the ultimate example of someone with no boundaries. Somebody with no self-control. And obviously, this guy should have been put to death years before this crime was committed, the big one. Years before a lot of these other crimes were committed, the guy should have been put down like a dog. But he wasn't. And Deuteronomy chapter 21, people, they get so perplexed by this. And a lot of just stupid Christians, just ignorant Christians, have allowed the atheists to interpret this verse of scripture for them. But I believe this scripture right here describes guys like Darrell Brooks, and not Darrell Brooks of 2021 when he committed the crime, but Darrell Brooks years and years before. I don't remember how old he was, like only in his early 20s. I know he was overage when he was fooling around with a 15-year-old. But in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18, it says, if a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them. Okay? So this is a son, he does not listen to his parents. They're not going to go stone him because he didn't listen to his parents. No, they've chastened him. They've gone through the other process, and nothing is working with him. Okay, now Darrell Brooks, at this point, if, all of a sudden I was allowed to make all the rules, if all of a sudden I was the judge in that courtroom and I was allowed to do whatever I wanted to do, I would have had the bailiff beating the tar out of that guy every time he did anything that was disrespectful. Okay, he would have had to been, and the thing is, I don't know if it would have worked. Honestly, I think probably the only way you've been able to get that guy to behave is to either beat him so bad that he's doesn't have the strength to misbehave, or to literally, I guess a more humane thing they could have done is they could have like strapped him down on a table and stood him up, and then like put some kind of thing over his mouth, or some kind of like shock collar on him that if he spoke when he wasn't supposed to, the judge can push a button and zap him or whatever, shut him up. I don't know. I mean, I would have been completely for them doing something like that. But at the end of the day, guys like that, if it doesn't work, what people like that who will not be restrained, people who will take a beating and it still won't help them. You know what people like that do? They go and they ram their car through crowds of people. Guys that will beat women like that, guys that will, fool around with a 15-year-old girl, they will do these horrible things. They are the type that do the mass shootings. They are the type that do all this stuff. These people have no place in society, and they prove it. See, this son that it's talking about here, he's somebody that's proved already he has no restraints, that nothing will govern him. But you know what? They don't, in the Bible, they weren't dumb enough to wait until they're killing mass amounts of people. Okay? They saw the signs a lot sooner. And it says, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him, bring him to the elders of the city, and unto the gate of his place, and they shall say unto the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. So everybody assumes it's like the 7-8-year-old boy. But again, the chances are this is probably a young adult. I've not met any even teenagers that are just full-blown drunkards. Okay, but this one he's a good-for-nothing bum. I mean, there's a good chance he's full-grown at this point. And but anyway, the Bible doesn't give an age, but people just read that and they just see son and assume little boy. I think this is probably a grown man. And it says, and all the men of the city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you, and Israel shall hear and fear. And evil is not just sin, but evil is sin that is harmful to others. And it says, if you'll deal with people like that, people who will not be chastened, people who have no restraints and will not take correction, people like that, you know what you need to do? You need to get rid of them, is what you need to do. And then these other things won't happen. You'll put evil away from among you. You won't have people doing mass shootings. You won't have people driving cars through parades. You won't have to worry about that stuff if you do things the way the Bible says to do them. And this guy, again, clearly he had been chastened. He had been put in jail. He had done some time. But he had already proven none of these things were going to work. He had already proven that. So society had chastened him. Society had done some things to him, and he had already proven he couldn't be controlled. And I'm telling you right now, even if we followed that law, nobody's going to be putting kids to death. Again, when you, Bible says, train up a child in the way he's going, when he shall old, he will not depart from it. The Bible talks about, my mind's going blank, but foolishness is bound in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction driveth it far from him. And so again, people like this glutton that we're seeing in Deuteronomy 21, chances are when this happens, these are parents who were not disciplining their kid. They did not do any of those things, and so that foolishness stayed in him. But I don't believe anyone who is biblically punishing their kids is ever going to have to face something like this, or would have to face something like this. It's the people who don't do anything. It's the people who don't teach their kids to govern themselves at all. They let them eat as much as they want, stay up as late as they want, watch as much TV, play as many video games as they want. And let me tell you, they turn into the likes of Darrell Brooks. And so, again, a fornicator, it's more than just someone who commits that sexual act. And Darrell Brooks just happened to be one of those people, and who had even engaged in things that are unlawful according to our perverted society. Our perverted government that allows, same-sex junk and all that. Even they, frown upon, and it is illegal to do things with a minor. And this guy did it. But again, they let him out of prison, which was absolutely foolish. And whatever judge let him out of prison, people ought to be talking about whoever that was and holding them responsible for what happened in Waukesha. All these other crimes and people that just slapped him on the wrist, they should be being held accountable. They should be losing their jobs. They should not be retaining their seats as judges. And maybe it wasn't their fault. Maybe it was because that was the laws. But you know what? People need to elect better leaders that'll get more severe laws on the books. So when it comes to this subject of fornication too, an interesting thing about it is we see it used a lot when it comes to even spiritual things, and false prophets are also, compared in this way, and they often reveal themselves too. It seems like most of your just hardcore false prophets turn out to be fornicators and stuff too. But I want to read something to you in Jude. I've got a few more passages I want to show you about this, because I find this very interesting. So in Jude 1:3 it says, "Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints." Now, I don't have time to deeply expound on that phrase right there, but let me just tell you what that means, okay? This common salvation, okay? People, unfortunately, we let the dispensationalists convince us that we've got like this new salvation that the New Testament brought in. No, it's always been the same salvation. And, like the New Testament is this completely new era where we throw out the Old Testament. Let me tell you who came up with all that kind of teaching. The people that we see here in Jude. And so this is talking about we're to contend for the faith. And that's just a manner of doctrine and practice. It's not just about salvation in Jesus Christ. And he's talking about we need to contend for it that was once delivered unto the saints. This is talking about something from the past. And I believe, and there's without a doubt, based on the things he's talking about, it's things concerning morality. It is appropriate for preachers to go to the Old Testament and to teach morals from that. I do believe that those things are still the same. Just because the ceremonial things are done and there are specific things that were finished in the Reformation of the first century does not mean that the morals went out the window. They are still the same. God still hates adultery. God hates fornication. God hates homosexuality. God hates all that stuff. But you know what? Some of you have been convinced otherwise. You know why? For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of our God into lasciviousness and denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. And so because salvation is by grace and it's not of works, these guys are taking that doctrine and then they're turning it into lasciviousness and basically telling people, you know what, morals don't matter. Do whatever. But he said, I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. Well, that was in the Old Testament. I know. And Jude is warning this New Testament church, based on what God did in the Old Testament, that they better not commit certain sins like idolatry, like fornication. And it says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, under the judgment of the great day. So God judged the children of Israel that didn't believe. God judged angels, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So if God judged all these people, you know what? He's going to judge these false prophets. It says, likewise also, these filthy dreamers defile the flesh. He's talking about these false prophets, they defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities. They don't want anything over them. They don't want anything controlling them. Beware of any pastor who just has no accountability and who is against accountability and who preaches against pastoral accountability. You know what they do? They despise dominions. They despise governments. I preached them. I just did a clip about that. You know why? Because they don't want anyone restraining them from what they want. And they want something. Listen, bad, evil, wicked, fleshly people, they want something from church people. They want money. They want your praise. They want your adoration. A lot of times, too, they even want your women. And it says, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. But these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts. In those things, they corrupt themselves. So again, they're just like an animal. An animal just goes off its instincts. It doesn't have morals, and that's how these false prophets are. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor. These are spots in your feast of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. They're getting well taken care of. Okay, these are false prophets. Okay, they're being well taken care of. They're being well paid. They're taking advantage of things. They're eating well, and and they have no fear. They have no fear of God. They can be stealing from the church, doing whatever. They don't care. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. And that's why, we know of preachers who were using money, using church money, to gamble and, purchase hookers and things like that. It's like, how could somebody do something like that? Again, they're evil people. And you know what? Those people had no accountability. They had nothing governing them, nobody watching over them. And you know what? And people like that will preach against that kind of thing too. And so again, it's 2 Peter 2:10 says, but chiefly they that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise government. Presumptuous are they, self-willed, they are not afraid to speak evil of dignities. And go watch my clip about despising government. What that means, I go into great detail, but the despising of government, it's those who just don't want anything restraining their flesh from what it wants. And it's talking about false prophets in 2 Peter 2 also. They don't want you, any rule you come up with, they'll call it legalism. You know why? Because they're a fornicator at heart. They're a fornicator, probably doctrinally. Now, there's a lot of people that are fornicators doctrinally too. Just no boundaries when it comes to the scriptures. They will use the Bible in the most perverse ways. They will twist scriptures to suit their own agenda. They will change on a dime when it suits them, when they need to, because they want to do something. I know I've always preached against this, but now I want to do it, so I'm going to change my preaching on this subject. We know what you are. Okay, we know what you are. But 1 Corinthians 10:23, Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. And so what Paul's basically saying, if we go through all of chapter 10, he's talking about like eating meat sacrificed to idols. And you know what? There's no law that says I can't do it because an idol's nothing. But you know what? It's not profitable. You show me a verse in the Bible that says I can't do this. It might be lawful, but is it expedient? But Paul, the opposite, the anti-false prophet, okay, he didn't want to do anything he didn't want to give offense to the Jew, the Gentile, the church of God. The false prophet, the spiritual fornicator, they don't care. And not only do they not mind defiling you, they try to defile you, like they talked about in Jude. They're going to bring you down. They will violate your conscience. They'll do it on purpose. They will provoke you. Why? Because they don't want you restraining them. They want to be able to get up in church, behave however they want, preach whatever they want, no accountability, nobody even making them feel bad about it. And so they'll test the waters. They'll do weird things. They'll say weird things. They'll teach weird things. And are you going to do anything? I dare you. I dare you to try to say something about this. I dare you to try to tell me I'm wrong. But it says, keep reading in 1 Corinthians 10, says verse 27, if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. But if a man will say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Whether therefore you eat or drink, or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. So even though they're doing something and eating that food that might not technically be unlawful, it's not for the glory of God. It's in there, and then they're doing it for their own belly. That's pathetic. And it says, give none offense, neither the Jews, nor the Gentiles, nor the church of God, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So again, There are things that people do that are repulsive, disgusting, that are offensive. But it's like, if you can't give a Bible verse that says, thou shalt not do this very specific thing on this very specific day in this very specific place, then, you can't say anything to me about it. Okay. But in the meantime, they're not glorifying God. In the meantime, what they are doing is offensive. It's not expedient. No one's profiting from it. Yet, I dare you to try to stop them. And you know what? The fangs will show, ladies and gentlemen. You call these people out, the fangs show. Now, here's the thing about these type of people. Again, in the Bible, the Bible is very clear when it comes to fornicators. Put them away from you. Okay, keep them away. Put them out of the church. You can't have anything to do with them. But but when it comes to these spiritual fornicators, it can be a little more difficult sometimes. Identifying these things. Again, they come in privily. They creep in unawares. But you know what? The Bible showed us. It has shown us what these people, how they reveal themselves. And again, they're not just going to come in, just full-blown denying the deity of Christ or something like that. They're going to do these other things. Why? Because they are of the flesh. And so when you start seeing signs of stuff like that, again, accusing somebody of something like fornication, that's a really big deal. Okay. You should never do that without proof. Now, obviously, okay, let me illustrate it this way. I'm going to go a little over time today, but I think this is an important subject. If me and my family, we're hanging around another family, and I feel like the guy is being a little flirty with my wife. Okay. A lot of times, it's really hard to put your finger on something. Okay. I can't, I don't think I should just go and bring him before the church. It's like, hey, I think that guy was talking to my wife too much. Or, I think that guy, I didn't like the way he was smiling at her, or, I didn't like a comment that he made. It seemed a little inappropriate. See, what people do when they're trying to get something from you is they test the waters. They do little things, and they want to see how you're going to respond to it. They call it grooming today. People will, they'll start talking about inappropriate things. They'll show you something that's not appropriate, and what they're testing you to see how you're going to react. Now, when that kind of thing happens, it stinks because, you don't really have the goods on them that they're a pervert. You don't have the goods on them that they're a really bad person. But you know what? When they start doing that type of thing, what you can do is you can withdraw yourself. If I invite somebody over to our house and I feel like he's flirting with my wife, guess what? He's not getting invited back over to my house. And so it's the same thing too when it comes to a lot of false prophets. They groom you. There's little things they do. And, and a lot of times you can even be convinced, I think this person probably is bad, but you don't really have the smoking gun. You don't have the total proof. So what you just have to do in that situation is you have to withdraw yourself. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 6 says, now we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that ye withdraw yourselves from every brother that walketh disorderly, and not after the tradition which he received of us. For yourselves know how ye ought to follow us, for we behave not ourselves disorderly among you, neither did we eat any man's bread for naught, but wrought with labor and travail night and day, that we might not be chargeable to any of you, not because we have not power, but to make ourselves an ensample unto you to follow us. And so basically what Paul's saying right here, if you have someone that's disorderly, if you have someone who's not following the traditions, if he's not following the rules, if he's not behaving himself, withdraw yourselves. Okay? We don't necessarily have a smoking gun here. We don't wait until the guy is, you shouldn't wait till somebody's doing horrible things before you finally withdraw yourself and pull the plug on things. Just like we've got to stop waiting until guys do mass murders before we take them serious as criminals. We've got to stop doing that. Okay. Obviously those other things were, like with Darrell Brooks, they were a sign that he did earlier that he was a horrible guy capable of really horrible things, but it never should have even got there. And with a lot of false prophets, everybody's like waiting until you have them, taking the mark of the beast, worshiping an idol or something like that. That's not the way it works. There's little things they do to groom you. And when they start doing that kind of thing, you know what? You might not be able to just fully call them out, fully nail them as a reprobate false prophet or something like that. But you know what you can do? You can withdraw yourself. We see in 1 Timothy chapter 6, it says in verse 3, if any man teach otherwise and consent not to wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness, he is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes of words, whereof cometh envy, strife, railings, evil surmisings, perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness. From such withdraw thyself. But godliness with contentment is great gain. There's a lot of people out there, they might not be full-blown false prophets. They're not showing the evidence of that yet, but they are showing evidence of just being ungodly. And you know what? When people are ungodly, you know what you do? You withdraw. You back off. I'm not going to hang around this person. I'm not going to be around this guy. And what we've done is in the religious world, we've kind of become like the American court system, where we don't take anything except like mass murders serious. All these other things that in the Bible they said, put them to death for it. We're just ignoring all that stuff today, and then we're shocked whenever there's some kind of, mass murder. And in the religious world, we've got guys that are showing all kinds of evidence that they have no restraint in their life. They have nothing, no guiding principles. They have no accountability. Nobody can govern them. Nobody can control them, showing all the signs of a full-blown, fornicator. But we've decided that no, not until they're preaching, this false gospel, not until they're preaching, Catholicism or work salvation or whatever, we've kind of changed the bar, and we're just ignoring these things and then acting shocked when we find out that preachers are, literally committing adultery, literally stealing money from churches, even though, again, in these cases, you'll see all kinds of signs that they had bad character. There was all kinds of proof that they were ungodly, but they hadn't done the big things. And so, the thing is, Bible's very clear. These things go hand in hand. And a lot of times too, I've had to just back off from people, not because I knew they were a false prophet, not because I knew they were an adulterer or a fornicator, but at the same time too, when you see that they despise governments, when they don't have anything governing them, when they're doing things like railing, striving about words, doing all these other things that the Bible talked about, what I just do in that situation? I withdraw myself. Okay. And, and a lot of times too, you have people who they'll see people that are, that guy who they felt like was flirting with his wife, they'll just immediately freak out, publicly start calling the guy out. But then it's just real easy for them to back off. Hey, that wasn't what I meant. That wasn't what I was trying to do. And, we can't just go nuclear on people for some of those little things, that we're seeing. But, we can withdraw ourselves. And if we don't start practicing that, if we don't, in the spiritual world, we're going to have more and more examples of the Jack Scopps and things like that. There were signs that Jack Scott was a pile of garbage before everyone knew he was a pile of garbage. When he was polishing his shaft on that one sermon, that was a good sign right there. Some of the stuff that he had written about the Lord's Supper and things, those were good signs that this guy is in fact bad. When he started going after the King James Bible, as somebody who had been taught the way he had, that said a lot. And, and a lot of people weren't surprised when it all came out. And you know what? But the thing is, it would have been wrong for someone to accuse Scott of being a fornicator when he was after he polished his shaft. But it was a good good sign. Might want to withdraw from this guy. And a lot of people, they're real quick to just publicly nail somebody for the signs. But you know what? You can't do that. You just got to back off. And sometimes we do. We just you got to back off from people because we can't control everything. And but just understand, people reveal themselves when they have no boundaries. And a fornicator is one of the best examples of that, of a person who has no boundaries. And I know many people. One of the things that I know of several instances where I've seen people, not in my church, but like in the social media world, who are just out there railing on people all the time. And you know what they turn out? You find out they're fornicators. Not before they were saved. Not before they got in church. While they were saved, while they were in church, those same people who had no boundaries on their mouths, who had no boundaries in the social media, they had no boundaries in their personal, physical lives either. And that's why we see those things all associated so much in the Bible. And we need to learn to watch out for those things. And you've got to learn to control yourself. You have got to learn to have some boundaries in your life. You have got to learn to limit yourself. I think that's one of the reasons people ought to fast sometimes. If you can control what you eat, you can probably control just about anything. We've got to learn to discipline ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to turn out more of these Daryl Brooks types. And what a just a disgusting example of a human being this guy is. But what a better illustration of a man with no boundaries. What a better illustration. You can't find a better illustration, this guy, of a fornicator. That is exactly what he was, and he was never dealt with. And let me tell you, you don't deal with fornicators. There's no limit to how bad things are going to get with them. And if they let that guy out of prison, you know what? He'd do the same type of thing again, because nothing can control people like that. They just need to be put down. And so chances are, I'm sure he's probably going to get sentenced to prison for a very long time. Hopefully, I'm sure it will be his whole life. I'm thankful for that. But either way, I hope this was a help and a blessing, and you understand why I would use somebody like him as Daryl Brooks for a thumbnail on a subject like this, because fornication is more than just a sexual act outside of marriage, but it is a revealer of a character of the individual. And you can fix that. If you struggle in that area, it is something that you can fix. You're not a reprobate yet, but if you don't get dealt with, and let me tell you, if you are a child of God, He will deal with you if you're doing something like fornication. I promise you that, because He's not going to let you get to a Daryl Brooks point in your life. So anyway, I hope this was a help and a blessing to you. God bless you. We will see you all next time.